Well, hello. Very nice to see you both. I'm excited to kick off part one of this new series for Collective, which is the Roundtable sessions. And, as I was thinking through where's a good place to start for these, I thought, what's a subject that is prominent in the headlines these days that's very likely misunderstood? And that seems to be Greenland and the Arctic region. And so my first thought, of course, was Dr. Dwayne Menezes, who I met years ago, but we reconnected last summer when Greenland kind of started to appear in headlines a bit more and more. And Dwayne has quickly become our go-to resource for all things polar region. You happen to be joining us live from Nuuk as we speak. So very excited to hear about your recent experiences there. And who better to bring into the conversation to ask tough questions and get some pushback than my good friend Jacob Shapiro, longtime geopolitical analyst, someone who I have a great deal of respect for because he's a very sharp thinker, has a lot of conviction, but is also very eager for people to push back, which I think all of that will blend for a fantastic conversation about what's really going on in Greenland, in the polar region, and perhaps what's next. So with that, I will step aside and hand it over. Welcome to both of you.
Great to be with you. Dwayne, it's so nice to meet you.
It's lovely meeting you, Jacob.
I'm not going to ask you any questions at first. You're on the ground, as it were. How cold is it? Is it super cold? Is it like what's the temp like outside?
Well, it's been between -10 and -20 degrees Celsius. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but it's been an exciting time to be in Greenland. As you can imagine, there's perhaps more happening in Greenland these days than anywhere else in the world. So all I have to do is sit here in the apartment and have every world leader seem to be, paying a visit in solidarity or to learn more, and it's a fascinating time to be here.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, a big topic of conversation also at the Munich Security Conference. I'm sure you saw the reports about Lindsey Graham yelling at Mette Frederiksen and everything else. But before I start peppering you with questions, how about I'll just give you the floor for 5 or 10 minutes and tell us what you're seeing on the ground. What's your experience being right now? Because it's a couple weeks since the whole thing went down originally. President Trump has declared victory, which to me looks like he's declared that he won because he got what he already had agreed to. There's still tensions between, the U.S. and Europe. At the same time, Marco Rubio just got a standing ovation at the Munich Security Conference. It looks like the U.S. has turned its attention to Cuba. Greenland almost feels like old news. So just give us a sense, an impression of what it feels like on the ground here today and whether it still feels like you're in the middle of the storm.
Well, the year definitely started off with us being in the eye of the geopolitical storm and the media tsunami that followed. But having said that, it's important to bear in mind that the basic instinct in the White House that Greenland is strategically important to the United States is not a false. It's not incorrect. Greenland is of enormous strategic value. The point is, there is nothing the US could achieve through aggressive rhetoric that it cannot achieve by just coming to the negotiating table and having a chat. The Kingdom of Denmark already has in place an agreement with the US that offers, dating back to 1951, that offers the United States sort of unprecedented access, extensive access across the country for anything it might wish to do. So the entire hullabaloo that we've seen, in my mind, has done very little to achieve anything for the US. What it has done is send tremors through the entire Western alliance, shaken the foundations of trust and mutual respect that lay at the heart of the American-Danish and American-Greenlandic relationship. And it's also had an enormous social consequence for the people here. And that's what I've been seeing. The number of families and children that are worried about their welfare, people reporting that they can't go to bed at night because they're afraid of an invasion, young people having nightmares of an attack by a country they regarded as the closest ally. I've met people who've said that their relatives have moved to Denmark because they don't want to go through the emotional turmoil of living through these very difficult moments. And all for what? America already has everything it needs in Greenland. This degree of, fine, you want to shake up the Western alliance, go do it, but at what cost? Are we, what is the extent to which we're willing to go to sort of intimidate and harass and frighten 57,000 islanders who live here? And I think that is where, a line must certainly be drawn. Having said that, what we've also seen in recent weeks is a tremendous show of solidarity with Greenland from across Europe and Canada. We now have the French who've established a consulate. The Canadians have established a consulate. There was I don't know if you've seen it, but there was a wonderful video of a aeroplane filled with Canadian Inuit flying the Greenlandic flag in solidarity, who visited alongside the Canadian Minister for Foreign Affairs around 10 days ago, all in a show of solidarity. Now, the reason I came over to Greenland is I run a think tank called Puerto Research and Policy Initiative, and today marks the 10th anniversary. Greenland has been part of our origin story, and so it's great. I wanted to seize the opportunity to be here in the country that most mattered to us. But more than that, we also serve as a secretariat for a cross-party parliamentary group in the UK Parliament that's dedicated to Greenland. When we founded it back in 2019 or 2020, it made the UK Parliament the first parliament outside the Kingdom of Denmark to have a parliamentary group dedicated to Greenland. And this is committed to strengthening our bilateral relationship between the UK and Greenland. And again, we had 4 members of parliament who joined me from 4 very different parties, very different political parties in the UK. So we brought over a parliamentary delegation, and we had meetings all of last week with ministers, with MPs here. I think we met more than half of the Greenlandic Parliament, half of the Greenlandic government, almost every living Prime Minister and Foreign Minister. And it was all about learning how they feel, where we progressed in our discussions. So it's been, again, it's sort of, yes, even if the rest of the world may have moved on a bit, I do feel, as a result of my being here this week, sort of still stuck in the eye of the storm. Except that, the signs we're seeing now with the new rhetoric from the US, it seems to be moving from this unnecessary aggression to a more mature, a more pragmatic approach. Rubio's speech was definitely, not perfect, but much more in a positive direction than Vance's a year ago. So let's see what happens.
Yeah, I wish I could be optimistic there. I mean, Lindsey Graham having that dust up with the Danish Prime Minister and calling her, I believe, "little lady" was what he said. He did that,
Awful.
and then also, not to pick on Republican senators, but I believe it was Ted Cruz who also, when he was talking about Greenland, said, the greatest gift that the United States could give anyone is U.S. citizenship. So when we're talking about Greenland, like, they should enjoy the largesse of our generosity and all these other things. And so one of the questions I wanted to put to you, because I think this gets lost. I mean, if you look at polling, I think the last poll I saw, 85% of Greenlanders would say no to joining the United States. Can you tell us a little bit about why Greenlanders themselves are so anti the notion of joining the United States? Because I think, especially for American listeners, they're probably thinking, well, this is 50,000 folks on a fairly bereft island whose biggest export is fish and cod and seafood products. Like, wouldn't they like some investment? Isn't this good for them that the United States is paying attention? Why are Greenlanders feeling like it's not so good? Why are they huddling under their beds, worried about invasion?
That's a great question. Let me start off by saying Greenland is very open to investment. No one here has a problem with American investment coming in. What they have a problem with is annexation and aggressive rhetoric. Another thing I've noticed is, despite all the rhetoric from the US, the government of Greenland and the Parliament of Greenland are still doing everything they can to showcase in America with competing narratives, to make sure the Greenlandic people know that America remains the closest ally, and that the voice of the administration is only, even though it's the official voice of the US, it's yet only one of the many voices of the American people. That there are many Americans who are not in support of any American-led sort of annexation of Greenland. That there are many Americans who actually stand in solidarity with Greenland. And I think this message is being driven home. And I think it speaks more to the generosity of the Greenlandic spirit, that at a time of being under so much pressure, they're still finding it in them to defend that, you know, the complex diversity of American political opinion, which sometimes, you know, feels more a threat, you know, in America than it does here. So that's number two. Number three, when it comes to why Greenlanders are not jumping at the opportunity to be American citizens, think of the conflicting narratives here. On the one hand, the US is saying, let's offer you the gift of citizenship and, you know, we're going to offer you money and all of this. On the other hand, America already has Puerto Rico. Last week, I was watching the news coverage of Super Bowl and the way the American media were portraying Bad Bunny. The fact that he spoke Spanish, no, this is a man with American citizenship. This is not like Greenlanders. Americans are promising citizenship and then, you know, saying how wonderful life will be afterwards. You got Puerto Rico. Look at the way a Puerto Rican singer, proud of America, is being described. And that message, that's what people are hearing, right? It's not just a promise of what America can offer. They're looking at how Americans of different colors, with different languages, of different ethnic groups, of territories already in sort of some sort of free association with America, are being treated. If the Puerto Ricans are being disregarded in the American mainstream media, do you really think, even for 5 minutes, we're making American citizenship sound like an attractive promise to Greenlanders? Of course not. I think the Bad Bunny experience, again, has been the biggest own goal the White House could have shot at the same time when it's offering Greenland every kind of promise. And I must say, let's rewind the clock a few years. I was one of the most passionate advocates of the US taking greater interest in Greenland, the US increasing its economic footprint here, the US building closer diplomatic ties. I welcomed when in the first Trump administration, the US rebuilt its consulate in Nuuk, when the US decided it's important to woo mining companies in Greenland not to turn to China for investment, but to turn to the US. I welcomed when DFC financing was being, when there was a possibility of extending DFC financing to mining companies in Greenland, where the minerals would then be supplied to the American market. So I'm not, I think America has legitimate concerns and interests in Greenland. And I would very much like to see America make progress in this regard in securing its long-term future and interests in Greenland. But I do think the rhetoric of recent years has not helped in that direction. It has hurt American interests in the region. It has, and to be honest, if America had not mentioned annexation and acquisition, Greenland was automatically moving more and more and more into the American sphere of influence, led by the Greenlandic people. And now, what we've achieved, what the rhetoric has achieved, is that we've taken away all the progress made in recent years, and now Greenland is sort of almost saying, oh, if we had to choose, we would definitely choose Denmark over the US, which a couple of years ago, I would never have heard a thing like that. And so I think it's important for the US to look in the mirror and say we weren't wrong in identifying legitimate interests, but has our aggressive approach really backfired? Because that's a very important question for the White House to be asking itself. Another thing to consider is what Greenlanders have here. They have free healthcare. They have free education. They haven't, yes, it's very cold, but America's not going to change the temperature of the country, is it? There's nothing America can provide accept larger bags of money that Greenlanders already have. They're very proud and happy people. Their arguments with Denmark is about having greater rights. It's not about, I don't think any Greenlander actually believes that living in an extended bit of America without public health care, without universal health care, without free education, without all the benefits they receive in this sort of European socialist model, would be a more meaningful or more attractive offer than what they currently enjoy. So that is not to say I don't want to see America present here. That's not to say America. It's just, I think America needs to rethink its approach and reassess what it's offering and realize that people the world over aren't all American in sort of what they've grown up aspiring to be or have. And the Greenlanders are a great example where American discourse, where the American appeal to, say, greed does not work. You look at this country, these are people who've survived thousands of years in the most extreme environments through a completely different way of life. It's community, solidarity, being very, very not materialistic, learning to adapt to the environment. You can drop bags of money. What are you going to do with it? I don't think it's attractive to many Greenlanders. So I think it's really, I think America really needs to start thinking of the rest of the world through the eyes of the rest of the world and not through the eyes of someone living in Texas or California or red or blue, because the rest of the world is not an extension of America. Sorry.
Yeah, no. I was talking to a Danish analyst friend of mine who was descended from some Greenlanders and eventually made his way to Denmark. And by the way, if I was choosing between healthcare in the United States and Denmark, I think I would choose Denmark myself. Would that I had such an option. But my Danish analyst friend reminded me that in the 1960s and 1970s, the U.S. was trying to put nuclear weapons into the Greenland ice shelf so that they could have a second strike capacity if the Soviets hit the United States. Project didn't go particularly well, which I want to come back to that in a second to talk about minerals. But there was some nuclear cleanup that had to happen, and the folks that actually cleaned it up were the Greenlanders. And there were this is a small population, so there's a significant chunk of Greenlanders who were not told what they were cleaning up, but the Americans' nuclear and radioactive garbage. And have faced, they're one of the reasons they're calling on Danish healthcare so much is because they're dealing with the fallout from some of that radiation. My analyst friend just reminded me, look, the Greenlanders since the 1960s have not been so cool with how the Americans treat them and how they think about them and the lack of clarity that they give to them. But I wanted to ask, you said that American strategic interests in Greenland are legitimate. I agree with you that there are some real interests, but I, for one, don't think minerals are one of them. At least from where I sit, you can get anything that's in Greenland cheaper, far more easily elsewhere in the world. And also the Greenlanders have basically banned extractive industries, in part because of their experience with the nuclear fallout from the 60s and the 70s. So talk a little bit about, I'm setting you up there, but I want you to hopefully dispel this notion that it's minerals that make Greenland important. Talk to me a little bit about why the Greenlanders find themselves in the eyes of the great powers, once again, because they have been basically since World War II.
Absolutely. Let's start with the mineral issue and to get it out of the way. Yes, Greenland sits on enormous critical mineral riches. Yes, we have some of the largest reserves of rare earths in Greenland. But I think it's important to point out, having large reserves of rare earths is not the same as having accessible reserves of rare earths or affordable access to those reserves. So yes, now we have an American firm called Critical Metals Corp that's come in and bought perhaps the most strategically important rare earth project in Greenland called Tanbreeze. The project itself is called Banefield or Kringland, or one of the two, I'm so sorry. And this is in the south of Greenland, perhaps the largest rare earth deposit in the world outside China, or perhaps even including China. And it is very much now sort of on, I think it's New York Stock Exchange listed. It's very much sort of in the American sphere. There are a number of important mining projects from zinc and iron to all sorts of rare earths and platinum group metals and all of that. But you're absolutely right. I think mining may be a reason why, like British, Australian, Canadian firms have been eyeing opportunity in Greenland. I don't think it's the reason why America wants to acquire Greenland. I think Greenland's strategic importance to America is much more about its location, and I think Trump has been very open about this. I mean, the one good thing about Trump is you know where he stands, right? He may change his mind 1,000 times, but he wears his heart on his sleeve. Sometimes I wish he did, but at least we all know what he's thinking. And he made it very clear. This is not just about mining. It's not just about minerals. It's about the security implications. If you were to launch missile attack on the North American homeland, the quickest way to do so is via the North. The North does represent perhaps the largest, relatively little protected frontier when it comes to American security. Hence, I do think the US is completely right to want to find a way to secure the North, to make sure Europe steps up and secures the European Arctic just as much, to make sure Canada steps up and works alongside the US in securing the North American Arctic, and that both the North American and the European Arctic are better prepared to defend ourselves against any current or future Russian or Chinese threat. The basic logic here, I think, is completely sound. And I think all of NATO should back the White House on this issue. Where it goes wrong is this totally false narrative. Now we have Russian and Chinese ships about to enter Greenland, and that's why the US needs to take over. This is not true. This is completely not true. And this is what I don't get. Like, just be honest. Yes, you do have a long-term strategic issue, but we don't need to pretend like that, right here, and America needs to take over Greenland in order to save Greenland and save the West. This is pig's breakfast. I mean, it's complete hogwash. And I think it's another thing where Greenland is important is whoever has Greenland has a better capacity to monitor aerially and better for monitoring and surveillance. It's incredibly useful. To prevent an attack, it's incredibly useful. For domain awareness, it's incredibly useful. And of course, we can go back to the period you mentioned, the 50s, 60s, and 70s, where, we've seen, let's go back, 1940s. America was so worried that the Brits and Canadians would take over, that they decided to, try and buy Greenland if they could. And then when Nazi Germany occupied Denmark in 1940, leaving Greenland as the unoccupied territory of an occupied European power, of course it made Britain, Canada, and the US very worried. And Britain and Canada may have gone in. There were plans because, Britain had already gone into Iceland and the Faroes. And there was a good chance Britain and Canada could have gone into Greenland. And that's when, America stepped up and said, okay, America's going to go into Greenland. And fair enough. America built about 10 or 17 bases and had about 10,000 personnel in the coming years. And of course, there were a very interesting arrangement of how that happened because the Danish ambassador and the Danish minister in DC walked a very different line from the occupied government in Copenhagen and signed an arrangement with America that gave America access to Greenland, almost unlimited. But then after the Second World War ended, the Danes thought the Americans would simply leave, and the Americans didn't. Even in 1948, the Americans were just there. And the Danes were like, how are we going to kick them out? We don't have the power to kick them out. But as an ally, we assumed America would step out on its own volition. But it's one of the reasons why Denmark joined NATO, with the hope that, once the Kingdom of Denmark is in NATO, America will feel less of a need to have a occupation of Greenland. Of course, 1951 onwards, you have the Defense of Greenland Agreement signed between the Kingdom of Denmark and the US that again confirmed that while this was Kingdom of Denmark, the US would continue to have sort of almost unlimited extensive access across the country. And if the US reduced the number of bases it had eventually to one, Greenland and Denmark had nothing to do with it. This is really important to point out. This was a decision made by the US. There's nothing stopping the US from having more bases in Greenland. There's nothing stopping them from asking Denmark if they could have 17 bases again. I think it's really important for Americans to understand that if the American presence in Greenland militarily decreased over the decades, this was a result of decisions made in Washington, not in Copenhagen and Nuuk. One thing to bear in mind is when the agreement was signed with the Kingdom of Denmark, you did not have a government in Greenland, because Greenland received home rule only in 1979 and it received self-government only in 2009. So the question arises to many Greenlanders as to their land. The decisions about their land have been made by what they might regard as a colonial power, Denmark, with a foreign power, the US, without any voice for the Greenlander at the table. All that needed to happen was for the US to say, let's expand the negotiating table, let's have US, Denmark, and Greenland sit in some form of trilateral forum, and let's revisit all the arrangements. And this happened in part in 2004, when the government of Greenland was consulted about the 1951 agreement, and it was updated accordingly. So there's absolutely nothing I can think about that could have provoked the US into going on this strange obsession in more recent years, except that perhaps this is all about a president trying to cement his legacy as president through a massive real estate acquisition, which he's trying to justify using legitimate security interests of the United States. It's the securitization of a non-problem in order to create a legacy that's strangely not delivering to Trump what he sought to get, but has actually undermined all the progress made over decades when it comes to the US presence in Greenland. And I think, but when it comes to when it comes to the nuclear bits, yeah, the relationship has always been strong but complicated. When the US had to build Tula, it's the one base it still has, now called Pacific. It did mean the local indigenous group had to be relocated to another place, to Kanak, and these things did cause issues. That the constant relocation, even if not forced, the constant relocation of local people to make room for a military presence or activity has caused distress. It has affected traditional lifestyles based on hunting and fishing, and it has had intergenerational consequences. I think also the use, say you have thermonuclear bombers, B-52 bombers carrying thermonuclear weapons sort of flying around Greenland all the time during the Cold War in the 50s, or you're building Camp Century and Project Iceworm. Camp Century was where they were developing Project Iceworm that would have seen tunnels of more than 50,000 kilometers, 3 or 4 times the size of Denmark itself, all built under the ice cap, where the US would store 600 Minuteman missiles. The problem is not so much about America using Greenland for its defense purposes. I don't think anyone has an issue with that. I think the issue is what happens when things go wrong? What happens when, of the 4 thermonuclear bombs being carried, one of them has a crash, and then you have the nuclear waste sort of dispersed across a wide area, and then suddenly you have a cleanup operation, and you have conflicting narratives about whether the cleanup was successful, how much of it was sort of cleaned up, and of course then the health consequences for Greenlanders who are involved in the operation. It's the same thing. You have toxic waste in, take Camp Century, where you have an entire city built under the ice for the Americans. Okay, number one, let me start by saying it's ingenious, right? What a brilliant architectural feat to have pulled off in the 50s or 60s, to build an entire urban camp under the ice cap with a church, with schools, with like a whole train line. Fascinating. again, that's not the problem. The problem is when things go wrong, what happens? When you abandon the project, you have human waste and nuclear waste and all sorts of biological waste just sort of left in the ice. And in the past, it might have been, people might not have known it because, the ice wasn't melting as much. But now as the ice is melting, the challenge is that these hazardous substances are being released into the environment, which the Greenlanders have to be living with. And so, again, even Greenland was upset. Greenlanders were upset. They resolved the matters. They fought with Denmark and the US. They had chats. Nothing required any form of dramatic action on the part of the US. These were all challenges in a very strong relationship, that creases that were ironed out politely through discussion and debate, and things were all under control. So once again, I do not understand why our closest ally would risk everything it had built so carefully for something so completely unnecessary. But anyway, back to you.
No. I wanted to ask a little bit about the practical effect of U.S. power production when it comes to Greenland. Because to your point, if you're thinking about Greenland and if you're looking at a map, if you're trying to block, say, Soviet submarines or German submarines from joining the Atlantic Ocean, Greenland is really important. It's this Greenland-Iceland-UK gap, which is why the U.S. seized it in 1940. If the U.S. doesn't seize Greenland in 1940, maybe the Battle of the Atlantic goes a little bit differently. Maybe the Nazis do things differently. So that's why it's so important. But to your point, the Arctic is melting. Those sea lanes are becoming more traversable every single year. And the more the climate warms, the more traversable they become. There's lots of other resources that are up there. You've got polar powers like Russia and others that are looking to utilize it. But the United States is not to get too dune on everyone, but the United States is not an ice power. The United States spent the last 20, 25 years fighting wars in the desert. The United States is not a great shipbuilder anymore. They have maybe a couple polar icebreakers. Most of their icebreakers are old and are sitting on the Great Lakes to deal with that. Russia is the one that has 40 icebreakers. And then you've got Denmark and Finland and some of these other countries that are spinning them up, Denmark as well. So for the U.S., Greenland is it's a defensive sort of line. You have to be able to prevent ships from coming through or prevent the missiles that are coming through. But it does not allow you to project power in any meaningful sense. And I sort of would laugh at if the United States was going to invade Greenland, good luck. I don't know who you're sending the polar rangers there. That's not a force that exists within the U.S. command. So what do you think about U.S. capacity to project power? Because it seems to me that if the United States does not have a partner like a Denmark or like a Finland, there's actually not a whole heck of a lot they can do there. Just talk to me about U.S. power projection, because I also think there's an interesting story there inside the United States, which is, does that mean the United States is going to invest in polar capabilities? Is that something that we should be watching for? Is that a pipe dream? And so all of this is really just rhetorical and it's really just, a Trump vanity project. I wanted to let you cook on that question.
I think we've got to be really, really careful here. Yes, I criticize Trump when it comes to wanting to buy Greenland, but I think it's important that people who regularly criticize Trump don't use this as an opportunity to also delegitimize legitimate US interests in the Arctic. What would be really bad for the alliance as a whole is that people who do not like Trump use this entire episode as an excuse to sort of weaken American and Allied interests in Greenland. The truth is, for the last decade or two, it's been the power balance in the Arctic has been very asymmetrical. Russia is far more equipped. Russia's invested a much greater percentage of its GDP in the Arctic. Russia receives a much greater percentage of its GDP economically through the Arctic. The Arctic is a much bigger part of the Russian view of itself. I don't think many people in Texas or Florida might have as much of an affinity with the Arctic as some people in northern Alaska. Whereas I think you might see a different picture emerge in Russia, where most people recognize the importance the North plays in the Russian politic and economy. Russia's been investing heavily in its infrastructure capabilities across the north. It has ships moving all the time. It has icebreakers. It has, much better fleet of icebreakers than all of NATO put together. So where Trump is right, where the US is right, is that the US and NATO has to do an enormous amount to catch up and to sort of, not just catch up, but to sort of have the competitive advantage. Investing in US capabilities, polar capabilities, is the need of the hour. Absolutely. You cannot be operating with two, I don't know how many, there used to be like one functional icebreaker, half, one thing that could be used. I think it's one or two, maybe, it might go up to three. I think it's really important the US invests in its own icebreaker capabilities, and it encourages all other NATO allies to do the same. Number two, it's important for the US not to forget that the greatest unguarded, relatively unguarded defense, unguarded frontier that could affect North American defense is not Greenland, it's Alaska. You have your own piece of the Arctic that the US is not investing in enough. Alaska is suffering from a massive, chronic underinvestment in its infrastructure, in its security capabilities. And I find the Greenland narrative to be entirely distracting, because you are trying to gain possession of an Arctic territory you do not have, while you are totally underinvesting in a huge Arctic territory you actually do have, right? And guess what? Guess of Russia and Greenland, which one sits closer to, of Alaska and Greenland, which one sits closer to Russia? I mean, you could be, if you're on the Diomede Islands, you could literally look across from the American Diomede Island to the Russian Diomede Island. That's how close you are. If it's ice, you could literally walk from America to Russia on the sea ice, if one could do it. And yet, we are leaving, think about it, that we don't have a single deep water harbor all the way from, Utqiagvik in the northernmost point of Alaska, all the way down to sort of Dutch Harbor or the Aleutian Islands. Nothing. We are so preoccupied with Greenland that we have one of our greatest NATO vulnerabilities in the North American Arctic in Alaska. What if I were the US administration, I would focus, number one, on investing in Alaska, on creating deep water facilities there, investing in the port of Nome, investing in Dutch Harbor, making sure there's more sort of monitoring capabilities. Then when it comes to the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap, the best place to invest in monitoring capabilities would actually be the port of Scapa Flow in Orkney, because that's where the ships are exiting from Norway and coming down towards Scotland. What on earth? Greenland is so far away. Remember, there's Iceland between Greenland and the UK. It's about, it's about 300 kilometers between Iceland and Greenland, and about 500 kilometers between Iceland and the UK. And there are more Russian vessels and Chinese vessels that would be coming down in the waters between Iceland and the UK than between Iceland and Greenland. So again, this whole idea, this whole sort of totally twisted narrative of how, Greenland could be playing a role in relation to Russian and Chinese ships, it's not entirely untrue, but it's grossly exaggerated. We would be far better off investing in Scapa Flow, looking at ports like Kirkenes in Norway. So I'm not saying the US should not be thinking about the Arctic very much. It should be. I think it just needs to get its act right. I think this whole Greenland thing has become far too big and too much of a distraction. That's really, if we continue, it's going to weaken the entire NATO security apparatus. I think it's also important to point out that it's important we do have greater NATO involvement in the Arctic. So that comes back to your point. America's greatest asymmetrical advantage over China and Russia is not the cluster of weapons it possesses, but the alliance of allies and partners it maintains. Because your allies are your greatest force multipliers. And what's the use of investing in greater hard power capabilities if at the same time you spent every waking minute disrespecting your allies, undermining long-standing alliances, countries that have had people die for you, you are grossly denying or misrepresenting, or you keep like that horrible, disrespectful narrative of if America were ever under threat, none of the NATO allies would come to our rescue. I'm so sorry, but the only time Article 5 was ever triggered was when America was under threat, and every NATO ally came to its rescue. So again, the misinformation and disinformation that's being pumped into the American public is deeply worrisome, because it is undermining the fundamental basis of the American-led world order. And so when I critique it, this is not the rant of somebody who's anti-America. This is a rant of somebody who's very much passionately pro-America, and who wants a US-led world order, and who wants this sort of Anglo-American alliance to be maintained, who believes in transatlantic security. And so it's more the concern of a friend to see the US dismantle the very systems and structures that allowed the last 80 years of our human history to be marked by American leadership. And this is what worries me. So when it comes to your point about think of both hard power and soft power capabilities. You need your allies. NATO needs to be involved in Greenland. The European Union needs to be given a role in Greenland. The United Kingdom, the closest ally to the US, must be playing an important role alongside the US in everything. We cannot be speaking about invading Canada or making the 51st state or having these horrible side meetings with people in Alberta to call for some sort of secession in Canada. We can't be weakening our allies and our neighbors while talking about, the need to shore up Western security. I don't understand the narrative of we need to defend Western civilization when the greatest threat to Western civilization is not coming from Russia and China. It's coming from within, and it's not coming from the immigrants everyone seems so obsessed about. It's coming from this sort of hyperpolarizing politics that's emanating from America and sort of undermining the entire transatlantic alliance. And it's really important. It's in the interest of America not to be the greatest threat, the greatest existential threat America faces. America has become America's greatest enemy. And this is the course of history for every great power. Civilizations die not under attack, but most often by suicide. And it is our hope, as your closest friend, that America does not walk down a path of civilizational suicide, because we need America. We need a strong America. And we believe in a strong America. We just hope America rediscovers a sense of identity and purpose outside this,
Yeah, I won't monopolize the questioner's table here because I know I have to hand it over to the audience, but I'll just say you're basically quoting Abraham Lincoln: if destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher. But the way I would sort of close at least my portion of asking you questions here and then opening it up to the rest of the folks that are listening is, well, first of all, there's a very rich tradition in the United States of not having allies. That was George Washington's parting advice to the Republic. The advent of allies really comes after World War II, and as you're trying to maintain a global order. As somebody who is analytically fastidious, I can sort of do both. You can do the no allies conversation. You can also do the allies conversation. Both of those arguments make sense to me. What doesn't make sense is, well, we want allies on Monday and no allies on Tuesday and some allies on Wednesday and on Thursday. Like, who knows? We're just going to flip a coin. It's that level of volatility and uncertainty is there. And that's what sort of leads me up to my last question, which is, I think we want to think that the White House is being strategic and that it's thinking in the terms that you're talking about. But I have taken, this started as a joke, and I've actually started using it as an analytical model, which is to say, this is the reality TV presidency. Mm-hmm. And every week needs a new episode and needs a new subject. And then President Trump has to be the protagonist of the episode who solves the problem. And at the end, he gets to end the episode and tune in next time for what we're going to see. And I say this realistically because I don't think President Trump is thinking strategically the way that you are. I think Greenland was an episode in his reality TV show. I think it was an episode a month ago. I think he's done with the Greenland thing. I think he thinks it's already done, and he's moved on to the next episode, or even to the next season. Like maybe the season finale was, some of the things that he's been doing in the last couple of weeks. All of which is to say, I think you've actually laid out the constraints very clearly here. The United States is not going to conquer Greenland. China and Russia are not rushing to conquer Greenland. Probably in a couple of years' time, not a whole heck of a lot has changed. Maybe there's a couple more bases on Greenland from the United States. Maybe there's a couple more soldiers. Maybe there's a mining operation somewhere. But probably, like, the only truly interesting question, is there an independence referendum? Probably not, because if I was Greenland, I'd want to keep on getting that Danish health insurance too. So where do you think we are 5 years from now? Because to me, I think the moment has kind of passed. And I understand for Greenlanders, it's very easy for me sitting in my chair in New Orleans to say that. But like, at least from where I'm sitting, like, I think the page has already turned and that Greenland's locked in. But curious for your pushback, and then we'll get it out to our listeners. So.
I agree. I agree and I disagree. I mean, I agree with the fact that the current geopolitical storm has passed, but we're welcome to a world where predictability has been the first victim, so the first casualty, and so we don't know. We have America's 250th anniversary coming up. We have some big dates ahead. Trump's 80th birthday. We have what are the announcements going to be? Trump's going to need to come up with some announcement. Does that mean Greenland is back on the agenda repeatedly? No, I think we can't afford to take a step back and grow complacent again. I think we're never returning. This is my 100% belief. We are never returning to a world order where trust in America is 100% taken for granted. I think America will continue to lead the world order. We will continue to be allies with America. But I think there's going to be the innocence and the purity of that trust has sort of been far too muddied over recent months and years for it to ever go back, for it to ever heal completely. I don't think MAGA realizes how much they have harmed their own crazy causes, because every time they try and empower what they regard as like-minded organizations in Europe, when they interfere in European elections, as they just did in Hungary, when they try and fund, as they're planning to do, European think tanks and more MAGA-aligned, what they don't realize is the greatest supporters of America have always been the centrist parties. Whether you're center-left or center-right, the transatlantic relationship has survived because the center-left and center-right parties have generally been pro-transatlantic relations. When MAGA empowers, say, some party that's Hungary first or Slovakia first or whatever, they're going to receive American help for the time being so they win the election. And once they won the election, they're going to turn their backs on America. I don't think MAGA has they're so consumed with being successful campaigners that they're terrible governors. What MAGA's good at is campaigning, not governing. And I think this is the issue. America does not have the long-term thinking which recognizes that what seems like a good policy today of bringing like-minded parties together is going to backfire so badly tomorrow that if I were to go back, if I were sort of the thinkers in MAGA, no, you need to think about creating bipartisan support, cross-partisan support in every European country for the US. You cannot be seen, or you cannot actually be, financing fringe far-right groups as is happening. And I think this is becoming really, really worrisome. I'm so sorry, that's one of the points, but I do hope I may have completely sort of gone off on a different tangent. I'm so sorry, Jacob, but do bring me back.
You're here to go off on tangents. That's the whole point. So don't apologize for it. Shannon, if we have any questions in the chat, I don't see any right this second. I can keep cooking, but if there are any.
Yeah, I was going to pop in too and just remind everybody of the option to request to join. So you can hop on camera with us and we can chat kind of face to face. Y'all text me or use the chat if you don't see the option. I can throw a question out there just on behalf of the collective and the group. As you both know, we get together in person regularly, and oftentimes it's in places that are convenient for everyone to get to, places we've all been many times, New York, London, places like that. But for 2026, I have my eye on going somewhere a little more strategic for everybody, a place where we can really be on the ground, learning about what's happening. So, of course, I'm curious about the polar region and Greenland. Is that a place you would recommend a group like this visit and, see for themselves, perhaps meet up with you, Dwayne, in person? I'm really curious to get your take on something like that.
Absolutely. The best way to understand Greenland is by being on the ground. Number one, let's just go back from geopolitics. This is the world's most beautiful country. Hands down, you're not going to find, honestly, I wish it's too sunny. I would have shown you. I'm sitting in a drawing room in Nuuk, and the view from my window is just like icebergs floating on the Davis Strait and mountains in the distance that are laden with snow. And and this is winter. It's a stunning place, colorful homes everywhere. So you would enjoy Greenland very much from a aesthetic retreat perspective. Second, there's no place on earth more strategic right now from a geopolitical perspective. So big bonus. And three, just to share, if you're a group of investors, even if you say we're not going to invest in Greenland today, I'm so sorry, but the reality is that over the next 10 years, you're going to face this question 1,000 times from 1,000 different places. Because Greenland, investment opportunities in Greenland are real. They're going to become even more real over time. And I think having the early movers advantage of sort of coming in now and seeing where the opportunities lie and getting a better sense of just lay of the land would be, I think, hugely beneficial. So yes, very much would hugely recommend all your members to come visit Greenland. I'll be delighted to play host and introduce you to all aspects, the geopolitics, the geoeconomics, the sciences, as well as just treat you to the most beautiful country in the world.
Fantastic. I will absolutely be taking you up on that. And we'll have to see if Jacob's schedule allows, because we couldn't possibly go without him in tow.
Oh, that's a beautiful question. Thank you. So nice. Move away from geopolitics and talk about what matters to local people on an everyday basis. Yeah. Greenland has, it's a very stable democracy. It's very vibrant and healthy as a democracy. It's a multi-party system. You have about 5 main parties that ran in the last election and that have seats, maybe 6 parties, but 5 that have seats in the current parliament. The parliament is called Inatsisartut. It has 31 seats, I think elected through proportional representation. 4 of the 5 parties are in a coalition, and there's only one party, Nalarak, which is in opposition. The last election saw a massive reversal, where traditionally the 2 largest parties came 3rd and 4th, and the smaller parties that usually were 3rd and 4th just ascended to like number 1 and number 2 by a huge margin. But yet you have coalition governments. And I think what has helped the formation of this coalition is the external threat that has meant parties need to put aside all domestic differences and work together in the national interest. So again, a big gift Trump has handed to Greenland, not just to Denmark. I think it's most parties are pro-independence. Where they may disagree, like what makes them different is the timeline for independence. So like the 2 parties the dominant party right now, Democratic, the one that won the most votes in the last election, believes that independence should come at the very end of a long process of rebuilding local institutions first. Whereas then on the other hand, you have a party like Nalarak, which is very much, let's get independence now and then build institutions as we go along. So it's, but both, I don't want to misrepresent anyone, so I hope I haven't. But I think the difference is, and this is my main point, the difference is the urgency of independence and at what stage should the institutions be, at what stage should capacity be built, pre-independence, post-independence, during independence. That's what determines where people stand. When it comes to the US, I think all 5 parties have come together to release joint statements in a great show of strength and solidarity. Like people of Greenland are speaking with one voice. You then have the government of Greenland, which is called the sorry, I should not have started with what it's called because I can't pronounce it. Nalankara Resort, something like. Forgive me if I've got it all wrong. But the can I just say at this point that despite most ministries being very short-staffed, I work with such a large number of countries around the world to be able to say this with full confidence, that Greenland has perhaps the most able and skilled diplomats and administrators and parliamentarians for any country in the world. These are absolutely world-class people. So this idea that we might sometimes incorrectly have, that we are dealing with some sort of northern backyard, could not be further from the truth. We are dealing with people whose skill sets could match anyone in DC or London or Brussels, or even surpass them. Remember, these are people who've survived for thousands of years in the world's harshest environments, and as a result of colonialism, have learned your language and your culture and your way of life. They think and speak with 2 voices. They're fully indigenous, but they are fully European and fully North American in the way they think as well. And so they have this advantage of what Henry Dubois called like the double consciousness that then sort of goes into how they think and speak and feel and write and express themselves. And it's very, very powerful.
I'm excited to see all that firsthand, hopefully very soon. It's really nice to hear that perspective from you and that passion. Definitely makes me eager to understand the region as much as I can. I think it's a good note to leave it on. Really appreciate both of you so much. I know the group really enjoyed listening in on this conversation, so we'll share it more widely and get the word out.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And thank you, Jacob, for moderating.
My pleasure. I did the easy part.
Thank you both. All right, we'll see you both soon. Thanks very much.
Bye.